Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today it's two verses. So what I'll do is I'll say the prayers to the Parampara first, and then we will go through the verses. Okay. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Iti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesha Shunyavadi Paschapta Deshatarine. Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubheva Pattanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gauravakta. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 1, Canto 1, Chapter 15, verse number 43 and 44. Okay. Chiravasa Niraharo Bhadavan Muktamurdhaja Darshayan Atmanurupam Jadon Matapischavad Anveksha Mano Niragadhagad Ashranvan Bhadiro Yata. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. After that, Maharaj Yudhishthira dressed himself in torn clothing, gave up eating all solid foods, voluntarily became dumb, and let his hair hang loose. All this combined to make him look like a urchin or a madman with no occupation. He did not depend on his brothers for anything, and just like a deaf man, he heard nothing. Purport. Thus being freed from all external affairs, he had nothing to do with imperial life or family prestige. And for all practical purposes, he posed himself exactly like an inert, mad urchin, and did not speak of material affairs. He had no dependence on his brothers, who had all along been helping him. This stage of complete independence from everything is also called the purified stage of fearlessness. So I'll try to speak a few words on this verse before we go to the next verse, because the next verse in the purport we change topics completely a little bit. So, like I mentioned earlier, my purpose, this is more like a continuation from what I was speaking last week. I mean, on the topic of retirement, right? Because we can take this example of Yudhishthira Maharaj, and I mean in several other personalities in Srimad Bhagavatam, how they retired, right? So the takeaway from this one, at least for me, and as I go through this, I will share what my takeaways. Each one of you have your own realizations, so I will share what I take away from this. So please bear with me if I have, if I say something that does not align with your understanding. So I'll give a few statements as I go through today's class, right? The biggest statement I take away from this particular section or this verse is one needs to have an exit plan. So just like, most of us are into IT and, you may correlate with this, right? We deploy projects, and when we go and deploy projects, we have something called, we have a goal that we want to achieve. And then through that, with that goal in mind, we create a plan, we execute a plan, and then finally we have to exit out of the plan. Meaning we have a exit criteria, or we have an exit route defined to come out of that particular project. Otherwise, it will never be called a project, right? There's a difference between projects and operational maintenance. Right? So there is always an exit plan for every project. So similarly, you can see that when you look at our life goes in different stages. I think this is the Varnashram system that we will touch base in the next verse. There is Brahmacharya, there is Grihastha, Vanaprastha, and Sannyas. So before we enter each of these stages, we need to have a purpose. Okay, what is the purpose of my next stage of life? And then have a plan to fulfill that goal of that particular stage of life. And then in the end, we also need to have an exit criteria. I will tell you why, right? Why is there a need for exit criteria? One may say in Krishna consciousness, we are all, Jivera Swarupuhai Krishna Nityadas. What if we are just increasing our devotional service, increasing our attachment to Krishna? Why is there need for an exit plan? The need for an exit plan is not at the spiritual level. The need for an exit plan is at the material level. Because for each stage of life, you need certain capabilities or facilities or abilities to execute that particular duty in that particular stage. And as life goes on, we get older, and those abilities and capabilities dwindle away. And also life changes, meaning, generations move forward. For example, our generation is completely different from the next generation. So the way the material world functions also changes because Kala is always changing. Now, if we are stuck with the previous generational thought process and thinking, we will only cause trouble for the next generation if we do not exit that current stage of life. A simple example is you can take in the Varnashram system, for example, a person in the Grihastha ashram, say if he's an agricultural person, right? And he's learned to cultivate land. He has a whole lot of wisdom of how cultivating. I come from an agricultural family, and that's why I speak this. So the way my grandfather performed agriculture in those days was one way, and he's learned a lot through his, from his parents and how he can well perform that duty, right? But when it came time for my father to perform these activities, a whole lot of things have changed. And now, if my grandfather is still attached to do the things the way they are supposed to be done, what happens is it creates friction between generations, and that is one of the reasons. Not I'll mention of the other reasons. That's one of the reasons, right? Do we want to, teach the wisdom that we learned from our experience and let the next generation take it forward, right? That is a key thing. We will always be uncomfortable, meaning for the second piece is attachment to the result, the attachment to the way of doing things, because whenever we do any activity, there is a result, and then there is also the process. So there's a process in which how we do things to get that result, and then there is also the result, right? So the second piece of detachment is very important, is because if we are so attached to the process of how I do things and how I'm comfortable, or how various fears that I have, because there are so many samskaras that happen in our life, and we experience certain pitfalls and whatnot. And if we are so attached to our fears of things, we will never give the next generation an experience of their own. We will only create trouble. So as we create an exit plan, one should remember that it's okay that Krishna will take care. Things in this world never stop. They will continue to go forward. And it is important for the next generation to have their own experience. We don't have to be overly protective of them failing, right? Because, end of the day, how much failure can happen? What is the worst thing that can happen? We may have a plan that may not work out, and then we change the plan. The next generation or the next set of people will change their approach. They will learn from their mistakes and they'll move forward. But if we are so attached to do the way things we are doing, and we think this is the way we have to do, we will be stuck in that cycle because we did not have an exit criteria. We didn't have that enough detachment. We didn't have enough faith in the next generation, or faith in the process of that Krishna gives, right? Krishna also, through material nature, corrects people for their mistakes. So it is important to get away from that controllership. So at least for me, the biggest thing is this, is when Yudhishthira Maharaj is retiring, he was no longer worried. He was running a whole world. We all run a small family, a small organization, very little things, right? But we are so attached to the way things that we want to be done. So how do we get out of that? We get out of that by only having an exit plan, saying that, yes, Krishna is in charge. Krishna will take care of things. I have done my part, and then I will move on. And that's what Yudhishthira Maharaj is doing in this particular verse, right? He detaches himself from his occupation, right? He says, all this combined. Okay, where's my mouse? 1 second, I lost my mouse. Where did I find it? All this combined to make him look like Ushman, a man with no occupation. So he is no longer the king. He tells himself, I am no longer the king, and he gives the responsibility of the kingdom. And all his life, he was dependent on his brothers, right? We see the way he ruled the kingdom, the way he got his kingdom back, he was dependent on his brothers. Now he's giving up that dependency also. He's no longer dependent on his brothers. So another part that really struck me is this stage of complete independence from everything is so-called the stage of purified fearlessness. So purified stage of fearlessness. Something that strikes me here is when you hear this word fearlessness. In Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna describes the 26 qualities for devotee, almost the first one is called fearlessness, abhayam. And then in there, Srila Prabhupada very nicely describes in the purport, and then he gives the context of a sannyasi. A sannyasi is a person who has given up his attachment to his family, attachment to pretty much everything in this world. And he completely depends on the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And then he says he's not afraid of if he will get food, if he will get shelter and whatnot, but he's 100% dependent on Krishna's mercy. And that is the stage of fearlessness. So, for us to get there, eventually I want to touch on the topic of what does Varnashrama system mean, at least in my perspective, in this modern stage of life, in this modern world, right? So that's what I want to leave you out with, fearlessness. How can we build fearlessness for the next stage? So fearlessness is an important aspect for the next stage of life, and how do we build that, right? So we'll go to the next verse now. Udicim praviveshesham gata purvam mahatma bihi hridhi brahma param dhyanam navarteta yato gata. Translation. He started towards the north, treading the path accepted by his forefathers, the great men, to devote himself completely to the thought of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he lived in that way, wherever he went, purport. It is understood from this verse that Maharaj Yudhishthira followed in the footsteps of his forefathers and the great devotees of the Lord. We have discussed many times the system of the Varnashram Dharma, as it was strictly followed by the inhabitants of the world, specifically by those who inhabited the Aryavrata province of the world, emphasizes the importance of leaving all household connections at a certain stage of life. The training and education was so important, and thus respectable persons like Maharaj Yudhishthira had to leave all family connections for self-realization and going back to Godhead. No king or respectable gentleman would continue family life till the end, because that was considered suicidal and against the interest of the perfection of human life. In order to be free from all family encumbrances and devote oneself cent% in the devotional service of Lord Krishna, this system is always recommended for everyone because it is the path of authority. The Lord instructs, Bhagavad Gita 18.62, that one must become a devotee of the Lord at least at the last stage of one's life. A sincere soul of the Lord, like Maharaj Yudhishthir, must abide by this instruction of the Lord for his own interest. The specific word Brahma Param indicate Lord Sri Krishna. This is corroborated in Bhagavad Gita by Arjuna with reference to authorities like Asita, Devala, Narada, Vyasa. Thus, Maharaj Yudhishthir, while leaving home, for not constantly remembered Lord Sri Krishna within himself, following the footsteps of his forefathers, as well as the great devotees of all times. So I will not touch this last paragraph today because most of you are, definitely very devoted to Supreme Lord and have a thorough understanding how the Supreme Personality of Godhead is Parabrahma, Paramdhama, Paramam Pavitram. That is a verse that Srila Prabhupada is quoting, right? I definitely want to touch on this verse, which is, this section of the purport, right? In here, Srila Prabhupada is talking about the Varnashram Dharma, meaning we see how Yudhishthira Maharaj is going to his ashram of being sannyas, not even vanaprastha, because he's leaving all his activities and household, right? And earlier I mentioned, right, every ashram has a goal, and then you have to also perform the duties of that particular ashram in order to achieve that goal. And then finally also have the exit criteria, meaning how do I get out of this particular ashram and go to the next ashram? And that criteria is to not only fulfill the purpose of the current ashram, but also build capabilities that are needed for the next ashram. So two things, right? Fulfill the goals of the current ashram and also build capabilities in order to be able to execute the duties of the next ashram. So what does that mean in our context, right? So we are all grihasthas, and it is important for us to understand what is the goal of this particular grihastha ashram, right? So I quickly pulled, a small article that somebody wrote. I thought it'd be much easier for us to relate to this particular article. This is from the ISKCON Educational Services, right? So the essence of the grihastha ashram is, I also want to say one thing, right? When we go to the next ashram, for us to be successful to fulfill the duties of that particular ashram, we should not have any regrets of the previous ashram. I'll repeat that. We should not have any regrets of the previous ashram. Otherwise, what will happen is if you have regrets of what has happened in the previous ashram, then you will end up being stuck in no man's land, meaning we will neither be a grihastha, neither be a vanaprastha. We'll be continuing to perform the duties of a grihastha while trying to be a vanaprastha. So let us see what are the goals of the grihastha ashram, and then see if we can give ourselves 10% for that particular ashram, and then move forward, right, to the next ashram. So the grihastha ashram, obviously, one should understand, it talks about to make money and enjoy sense pleasures according to the ethical principles. I'll leave out the enjoy sense pleasure because that is a perspective dependent on each person's body, nature, their psychic, and everything. But to make money, or what it means to make money, right? If you look at the full picture of the varnashram system, the brahmachari, the grihastha, the vanaprastha, and the sannyas, the only ashram that can make money or cultivate food or whatnot that is needed for the rest of the ashrams is the grihastha ashram. Brahmacharis do not make money, vanaprasthas do not make money, sannyasis do not make money. So how does the whole varnashram system sustain? It sustains, or sustainment means it needs, every person needs nourishment. They have physical needs, they have mental needs. Last time I talked about the different koshas, and there needs to be stability in all of these koshas for us to reach that anandamaya level. So every other ashram depends on the grahastha ashram, first the people executing their duties in the grahastha ashram. So they need to do their duty of making money, providing sustainability for the rest of the ashrams. So what does this mean in this modern world, right? Because there is no varnashram system technically within the government established policies. In one sense, it is there actually, right? Most of the people who are paying taxes are grahasthas. As long as you're working, you're paying taxes. As long as you have an income, you pay taxes. And that wealth is being distributed either for schools, for educating children, for Medicare and Medicaid and whatnot to take care of the older people. They got some form of allowance. So in one sense, there is varnashram system in the background, while it is not looking like a clear varnashram system, right? But in the Krishna consciousness level, it takes us to a next stage, right? Not only just paying taxes, but for example, if you have children, it is important for us to give them a stable form of life, give them good education so that they can have a good grahastha life in their ashram. When they move from their brahmachari ashram to grahastha ashram, that they have sustainable, because in order for us to perform Krishna consciousness, there should be a balance, there should be a balance between, I think Srila Prabhupada uses a quote, right? At least you should be able to maintain your life in order to perform Krishna consciousness. So there is a big role for the grahasthas to play in the role of their children, or even beyond. If you take under your father somebody else too, right? It is important for us to perform that duty. So I'll quickly switch this gear of the koshas, right? There are 5 koshas that I spoke last about. Annamaya kosha, that is especially when we're dealing with young children. And Srila Prabhupada in Bhagavatam says, when a child is very young, they need food. Everybody needs food, well-nourished food to keep their body sustained and maintained, right? And food doesn't mean not just salad. There is a form of body they received because of their previous karmas, right? They may have certain needs for sense gratification. If that enough sense gratification is not available, either in terms of food or enjoyment or whatnot, it creates instability for them at the next kosha level, pranamaya stage, which is a good health, then manomaya stage at the mind level, it creates instabilities. So it is important for us to create the stabilities in the grahastha ashram. The second piece is perform sacrifice and observe religious rituals. So this is how we connect to Krishna in grahastha ashram. While we are performing our duty, it is important for us to take responsibility of dharma. Dharma means jivarat swarupohai krishnera nityadas, or dharmam tu sakshat bhagavat pranitam. So what is my role in the grahastha ashram? That is performing sacrifices. But in this modern day world, that is to help propagate the Sankirtan movement, performing Nama Yajna. So that is our responsibility. How can I support an organization or a person in the other ashrams, like a sannyasi or a vanaprastha? How can I support them? Because at this stage, earlier I told 90-10 rule, right? 90% of our time we're engaged in the material world, and 10% of the time we are engaged in Krishna consciousness in grahastha, as a grahastha, and that has to flip when we go into vanaprastha. 90% we should be Krishna conscious, and 10% we should maybe do the things that are needful to keep our body and mind and soul together. So it becomes the responsibility of a grahastha to maintain the other ashrams. So how can I support, a sannyasi or an organization or a movement so that they can do the needful in establishing the dharma on our behalf, right? That's our role. And as we go further down, I quickly touched upon, our dependents, family members, and whatnot. Again, I touched upon charity. That is the role of a grahastha. And, in this modern day world, because a vanaprastha and a sannyas are not 100% supported by the grahasthas, if you look at it in the modern day structure, it kind of falls as a responsibility on our shoulders itself, right? So there's a twist here in this modern day world. So it is important for us to understand what the needs, our needs are going to be in that particular ashram, and establish the needful. That is what is called retirement planning in this material world, right? The way this particular society is running today, either one should save for retirement, put 401k, ensure that you're paying your taxes properly so that you can get Medicare, Medicaid, or whatnot. And each country is different, right, how it works. But at least for us, those who are living in the United States, it is important for us to ensure that we plan for our retirement. I'll tell you why, right? Because the way the modern day works, if I take the Grahastha ashram, the Varnashram systems out, pretty much, even most of us have this experience, for us to run our life, pretty much it takes a whole lot of energy. I don't think we all save a ton of money at the end of the day when you get your paycheck, right? Most of it goes to the education and what are other responsibilities. Imagine how much tough this is going to be for our children in the future. It's going to get only worse, right? Bhagavatam says more and more taxes will be pulled from people. They will struggle just maintaining themselves, right? Now, if we depend on them for our maintenance, if we depend on our children, we will only become a pain to them. We will only become a burden. So, to as much extent as possible, understand what that particular ashram, what are our duties in that particular ashram, and what are our needs in that particular ashram, so that we establish that so-called retirement nest, right, that they call in the modern day world, that we have built that. And secondly, earlier I mentioned, also build the capabilities that are needed for that particular ashram. Capabilities means, you will see here, to engage in austerities and penance, right? In Grahastha ashram, if we are totally attached to being comfortable and stay through like that, then you will not be able to switch overnight to the Vanaprastha ashram. The moment you take Vanaprastha ashram, meaning you say, okay, I'm going to retire, I'm going to quit my job. You quit your job, they have a retirement party at your work, and then you go. Then you will, after 1 month, because you haven't had a goal or you haven't planned how you are going to retire, after 1 month, you will decide that this life is boring and you may take up a part-time job and go back to the Grahastha ashram. So we have to build those capabilities in Grahastha ashram to be a Vanaprastha. What does that mean? What do those capabilities mean? It's not just austerity and penance, right? For example, if I am going to be spreading Krishna consciousness, right? If I want to assist in spreading Krishna consciousness as, as a teacher or something like that, right? It's important for us to learn the scriptures in the Grahastha ashram. If you want to become an agriculturalist, meaning, establish the Varnashram system, helping, establish eco-villages and whatnot, you need to know what agriculture is. You can't learn that overnight, right? So there are so many options, right? We can see examples in our own life. For example, if you see Nirantara Prabhu, how he's nicely engaged in helping build up the garden, maintaining the property and whatnot. It's important to build those skill sets right now, right? Like Premanand Mataji, if you're trying to run the temple or help coordinate so many things, it's important for us to learn the skill sets, right? It's important for us to learn time management, people management, and whatnot. If you do that now, it's going to be much easier to execute your duty. Otherwise, you can create trouble in that ashram too, right? Because we have more time, we may end up creating trouble for the other ashrams. So it's like that. It's important to build those capabilities for that ashram. And Grahastha is a perfect ground to build those capabilities because we have the resources. We are out in that work in the material world working. You have so much training available, so you can take that training. You have a lot of money, meaning you're making money on a daily basis. So invest some money in building those capabilities in your own capabilities, so that you can devote 100% to Krishna consciousness when you become a Vanaprastha. So, yeah, my goal again here is building capabilities, building resources while you're a Grahastha to be a Vanaprastha. That is the first main point. And second point is execute your duties in the current ashram so that you do not have any regrets, meaning you do not continue to depend upon your children or say, oh, I could not do anything for my children and whatnot, right? Now, I would like to conclude with this, right? Because end of the day, we may have a certain idea of this is what I want to do, but material nature may not allow us to do it. It may not allow us to reach that goal. So I'll end up with a Christian quote, and this is often very quoted in Krishna consciousness too, right? The quote is, pray to Krishna that 100% depends on, the 100% of whatever you're doing depends upon his mercy. But when you're working, work as if 100% depends upon your efforts. So that should be the key principle. Either when you're executing the duties of your current ashram or you're trying to prepare yourself for the next ashram, execute your duties 100%, that it is 100% dependent on you. And then pray to Krishna as if the result of that is 100% dependent on Krishna's mercy, which is true, right? Because there are 5 things that need to fall in place for any result to come into play. So that's where I would like to end at. I think I went a little over time, but I would, if anybody has any questions, comments, I'm open. We can spend maybe a couple of minutes if that's okay, Lingaraj Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Mohana Lila Prabhu. Please accept my humble homage. This is all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Please accept my humble homage to Srila Prabhupada.
Very thought-provoking reflections just to build capabilities, and it's a great reminder for me. So one thought, Prabhuji, is that as we think about those capabilities, should there be, or are there already some support groups within ISKCON who are, everybody has different dharmas and how they will contribute in Varnashrama. So where there are support groups and people can jointly build those capabilities, and kind of not from the perspective of what we are doing today, but from the perspective of what we're going to do in Varnashrama. So that's just a question. Like you mentioned Nirantara Prabhu, doing so many wonderful activities, and Premananda Mataji. So they must have built the capabilities on their own or whatever, because they have all that talent. But some people like me may need some support groups. So that's just a thought or a question, Prabhuji.
Yes, Prabhuji. It's a great point, in the sense, like, I'll start with where Prabhupada's goal was to establish Varnashram Dharma, but, he didn't have enough time to establish that Dharma, right, that Varnashram Dharma. But I think, as far as I know, ISKCON is moving towards that, at least not in establishing like a Varnashram system, but ISKCON recognizes that certain capabilities are needed for devotees in order to execute their duties within the ISKCON as an organization, right? It has become very prevalent in the last several years, where, for example, right, in the past, it used to be like, okay, if we don't have somebody, somebody to manage a temple, just find a person and put him in their shoes, push them in the water, they swim and they come out, right? But that has changed. Now ISKCON has an educational services department where they are encouraging a lot of the leaders to go in and get education in terms of how to manage temples. And when I looked at that particular curriculum a few years ago, it was pretty much like our material curriculum, right? How do you manage time? How do you manage resources? How do you do project planning? How do you do many things like that, just like what we do in our material world, right? A lot of it is very similar, because ISKCON has recognized that, and Srila Prabhupada very clearly said, right, without proper management, this whole organization is going to fall apart. So ISKCON has taken that steps of trying to educate people in various aspects of management. At least I think that's the first big step that ISKCON has taken. But like many of us know, right? We, even in our material world, they give us training, they invest a lot of money on us, and it totally depends upon the individual, right? If you want to mindfully implement those principles, or just just by attending training, you cannot become good at it, right? Unless you implement it daily on your life. So at least in my opinion, what I say is most of us who have several years in Grihastha Ashram left, we can take advantage of those those opportunities in the material world. And then you build those capabilities, and it's only a matter of Krishnizing it, right? For example, if you look at Stephen Covey's time management principles, we can implement that even in Krishna consciousness, right? What are the big rocks? What are the small rocks? What are the pebbles? What is the water? How do I want to manage my chanting? How do I manage my, if I want to volunteer at the temple, how I can do this? So I think capabilities wise, it's not very different what is out in the material world. The only piece is how do you Krishnize that? I think that's the thought that's coming to my mind. And to your point, as a collective group, and I think until now it has become very individual, probably as a collective group, in my mind, I see a future for it, meaning a lot of the devotees, I'll tell you this one realization, right? Sorry, I'm going over time. A lot of the devotees earlier in Krishna consciousness, right? They dedicated their life very young in age. They didn't know how to serve the movement, but they put their whole energy and whatnot. But eventually, as it is shifting towards, right now, jokingly, one devotee who was visiting from India, a very, very senior devotee, he jokingly said, whenever I go and stay in a temple in America, I get depression. Because, when you go to Mangalarati, there is one or two devotees in Mangalarati and stuff like that, right? And they are so much used to 100 people in Mangalarati, singing Mangalarati with a whole lot of association and whatnot, right? So for us, a lot of us, our temple is a Sunday evening thing, right? Other than that time, and grateful, we should be very grateful to people who are running the temple, like Dhananjay Prabhu, Kanakabja Prabhu. They keep the deity worship going, and they keep, it's how much strength do you need, just to do all these services alone, right? So yeah, sorry, I diverted. But where I'm heading to is, I remember several years ago, one devotee who used to come regularly to the temple. He used to bring his children, and they used to come to the temple every Sunday, right? After a few years, he dwindled away. He stopped coming, and then I ran into him in Costco, right? And then when I talked to him, I said, Prabhu, you're not coming. Why are you not coming? Prabhu, I live a little far away. It's hard for me to come. But after talking a few minutes, he shared his mind. He said, Prabhu, I'll be honest, as long as I had dependents, meaning children with me, I felt a need that I should go to the temple every week so that, I can get Krishna conscious through them. And I also got nourished. But now, my children are grown up, they went to college, I think I give every other reason why not to go to the temple. I have to finish one chore, maybe I'm too tired today or whatnot. And then he shared, I think it's very important for us to say, I am doing Krishna consciousness for me. That is another thing that we need to remember as we get into Vanaprastha life. If we did Krishna consciousness for somebody else or because of our fears or whatnot, there will be a day when we will start to dwindle away because the purpose of that Krishna consciousness was different. But if we understand that Krishna consciousness is for me, and we execute our Grihastha duties and whatnot for the sake of my Krishna consciousness, then we will continue to stay in the path. I don't know why I wanted to say this, but it was a striking thing for me in my mind, because it becomes very easy when you have dependents to bring them to temple and whatnot, because there's a fear that, okay, there's my duty to give it to them. We often forget the duty to ourselves. Sorry, Prabhu, I don't know if that answered your question, but some other thoughts that came to my mind when you asked that question.
It perfectly answered it, Prabhuji, because the intention, yeah, like you said, intention is very important. Why we are going to the temple is kids is only part of the reason, not the only reason. It's actually majority of the reason is us. Yes, Prabhuji. Thank you very much. You gave a lot of good insights. Hare Krishna.
Yes, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, wonderful class, Prabhuji. Wonderful class. Such like thought-provoking. And you gave me like so many things, like right now what you are, in whichever ashram you are in, do it perfectly so that you won't carry the regret or the guilt going forward. That really struck my mind, Prabhuji. And yeah, retirement, okay, I'll enjoy my material life. That is a different thing. But here in this Krishna consciousness, it's a process that we have to start from right now. And it's for me, not for my kids or not for my husband. Wonderful class, Prabhuji. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Guru Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada. Prabhuji, the answer that you gave just now and the explanation of the person who stopped coming to ISKCON because his dependents were all done, it's really touching, because the way I came to ISKCON was because I thought, Advait needed to have, some, introduction to Krishna consciousness and Indianness and all those things. And I was perfect. I don't need any of that. So that is where I came from. And slowly and steadily, it took a lot of pushing and prodding by, Premananda Mataji and so many others, for me to move ahead and to even make a journey out of this. So thank you so much. It is very true that Krishna consciousness is for the self and not for others. Thank you.
Yes, I'll just complete the class with the two more thoughts to think about. Right, there is no sannyasa ashram. Technically, you would say there's no sannyasa ashram in the modern day world, unless you are out there. I would say 90% of us will not go into sannyasa ashram. So when we go through grihastha ashram and go, expect this. I'll tell you, right? This was an eye-opener for me. I'm sure Kiran Mataji and most of the people who are in the medical field are very well aware of this, but I recently implemented a project for their, for a home care, assisted living. We implemented our software for them. And it kind of opened my eyes of what kind of life exists in that particular ashram. And each one of us are not exempt from this, right? When you're a vanaprastha, you're fine because you still have capabilities, meaning you're able to take care of yourself and whatnot, and maybe your children are able to assist you. But when you go through the later stages of life, you're 100%, I would say, slowly, you're 60%, 70%, 80%, 90% dependent on help from other people. In the olden days, I think when we were young, we saw our parents being taken care by, our grandparents being taken by care of parents. But it's going to be very, very tough for our children to take care of us, our physical needs, even going to bathroom, even, eating food and whatnot, right? We will end up in an assisted living facility. And there are different kinds of assisted living facilities. It's funny, right? The first level is, you're able to do basic things for yourself. You're able to walk, sit in a couch, you're able to take a shower and whatnot, right? You're able to go to bathroom. Only you're dependent on food. So somebody gives you food and you eat that food. You're unable to cook, the next level is you're unable to take care of yourself. You cannot go to bathroom. You cannot take a shower, right? What I heard is, say, if you're unable to go to bathroom, you get a diaper. And if you went to bathroom in the morning, 8 o'clock, you may not get a diaper change until evening 10 o'clock. That is shocking, right? For those of us who are in Krishna consciousness, who have cleanliness in mind and whatnot, right? You may get a shower every several days. You will not get you don't get a shower every day. And then there is there is called in-memory care. I was shocked about this, right? Most of us in old age are prone to, what is it called? I'm forgetting the name, dementia, other memory problems. You don't know who you are. You don't know where you are. You may get, if you go out of the door, you may get lost. So you are put in a facility which is gated and you're not allowed to go out. So imagine being in a facility like this. And because medicine is advancing now, you're kept alive, through medicines and whatnot, you're kept alive for a long, long time. And so that is our sannyasa ashram, technically, if you think in the modern day world. So how would you still remember Krishna in those circumstances? Would you start blaming other people, your children for not taking care of you? Would you blame the system for not being fair to you or whatnot? Or would you still rely on Krishna? That's another thought to think about. Sorry, it is depressing to end that way, but that's the reality. Maybe someday Kiran Mataji can actually give us insight into how those circumstances look like.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Yeah, I don't think the picture that you're giving is like, I think there are pros and cons to everything. There's a lot of benefits from that kind of living too. But in general, I think the way you presented today's class, what that makes me think is that we as a community need to come forward and, like Prabhuji Savyasachi Prabhu was asking too, I think collectively we should do some efforts to help each other out. Yes, we are used to living and we want to live the Krishna conscious kind of way. And those things are still possible if we plan it out, at the right time, in the right way, with the right resources, which is the need of the community. I think we overlook that aspect a lot, but I personally have given a lot of thought, and I think if we collectively use our skills, like who has what in our community, I think we can come up with great plans and preparation for our next ashram. Mm-hmm.
Hare Krishna. Completely agree with Kiran Mataji and everything that has been said. I know we are over time, but Prabhuji, I have also seen people in villages in India who never have dementia, Alzheimer. I mean, these words are even unheard of. And Alzheimer's, dementia, and people in villages still do, who follow the Vedas, they still do yoga, men or women. I've seen 98-year-old woman, 100 years doing yoga. I'm talking about the physical aspect of yoga. And so they never have to, go into diaper situation at all. Of course, somebody goes into an accident and get handicapped. That's a different thing. But, Krishna has also described yoga as a means to not fall into these those kind of situations. But our Western life, trying to take convenience and from the Western life has caused these things, Prabhuji. Yes, I just want to share.
Yes, Prabhuji. Yeah. Thank you, both of you, Kiran Mataji and Savyasachi Prabhu. Yes, I think, I did definitely portray the other end of the spectrum. Definitely, there are so many things that come wonderful out of the system. Yeah, we can end it here for today, but I'll give you some homework. Try to see. There is within the yoga system there are the 5 koshas, right? I would recommend each one of you to look at the different koshas that are described: Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Jnanamaya, Vijnanamaya, and Anandamaya. and see how does that play in different ashrams, how much we are dependent on those koshas for us to have an experience on the mind level. So if you're interested, do some homework on that or some research. It'll give you definitely some realizations of how you can create stability within yourself to execute or to experience that Krishna consciousness on a Maya level. Okay, we'll definitely end it here. Thank you very much for everybody who's contributed for some discussion. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.